So today's webinar is about the fourth meeting of the Expert Working Group on Environmentally Sound Management that took place in November last year in San Francisco. This was the first meeting of the group following the Conference of the Parties that took place last May. Just to give you an overview of what I will raise in the presentation today. Well, firstly, we'll look at the outcomes of that Conference of the Parties meeting that took place in May, because it's good to put the context within which the group is working. So we'll go through the decision quickly. Next, I will outline the main outcomes of that Expert Working Group meeting that took place in November. I'll go into some next steps from this webinar on, and then there'll be an opportunity for questions and answers. So looking to COP12, which took place in Geneva in May last year. On this topic, the topic of the country-led initiative, and specifically on developing guidelines for ESM, there was quite a lot of discussion and outcomes as a result of COP12. One of the most important outcomes was the adoption of the work program of the Expert Working Group. So the group had been working on short-term actions and its draft work program in the lead-up to the meeting. It had already developed quite a few outputs, which it shared with the meeting. But in terms of future work, the work program was adopted. Also, the mandate of the group was extended such that the members were continually mandated to implement the work program. And this work program really is an ESM toolkit that the group is developing, and the COP recognized that we'd check back in next meeting to see how it may be evaluated. Now, something the group had already developed over the past few meetings are these draft practical manuals and fact sheets. They were presented to COP12, and the parties welcomed them, but also saw that there would be a need for a commenting round and some revision to the manuals. So coming from COP, there was the request for parties to submit comments on the manuals, then for the Expert Working Group to revise them, and this also applies to the fact sheets, and then they would be submitted to the Open-Ended Working Group at its 10th meeting, which will be this coming May, and then subsequently to the 13th meeting of the Conference of the Parties, which will be in 2017. Additionally, under a different decision, the Cartagena Declaration on the Prevention and Minimization of Waste, there was a roadmap developed. This roadmap really has actions for parties and BCRCs and other key stakeholders, encouraging them to take certain actions to implement, to promote the roadmap. However, there was one action directed to the Expert Working Group, and it is development of guidance on efficient strategies to achieve prevention and minimization. So this is an important extra piece of work, and actually the group, the composition of the group and the group's numbers increased by 1 member per region after the last COP. So there are 5 new members. Well, actually, there are actually only 3 that have been nominated to date, but there are the idea is that there are 5 new members that have specific expertise in waste prevention and minimization and can lead on the work related to the Cartagena Declaration. Another request from the COP, given that there may be a need, for example, to update technical guidelines, develop new technical guidelines. There needs to be more information about what documents there are already available under the Basel Convention in relation to ESM. So in that regard, the COP has asked the Secretariat to develop that inventory, and the expert working group is to give guidance on that. There's a fairly standard request to parties, or invitation, I should say, requesting information on activities undertaken to ensure ESM, and parties and others are requested to provide this information, and the Secretariat to make that available on the website. Finally, as with many COP decisions, there's reporting requests, which basically entail for the expert working group to report on its activities at OEWG G10 and COP 13. I'll come back to that more in a moment. So as I've mentioned, the fourth meeting of the group took place in November. The meeting was kindly hosted by Sims Recycling, a private sector observer, and Japan, the government of Japan, very kindly provided the funding for eligible participants' travel. We had a good number attend, 19 members, so that's 19 of the 30 members and 12 observers. And really the objective of this meeting was to take stock of what came out of COP12, and then also to look at progressing the work already started. So for example, the fact sheets, manuals, pilot projects, which I'll come to in a moment, and to also look at developing new activities under the work program that was adopted at COP12. So coming to the outcomes of the fourth meeting, I'll start with something that's quite straightforward and an area where the group has already had much success, and that is the development of pilot projects to demonstrate and implement ESM. Thus far, the group has already selected 5 projects for implementation, 2 of which, for 2, the implementation is ongoing. 3 are finalized. Thanks to funding from Norway and Japan, there was the opportunity to select 3 further pilot projects at this meeting. And you can see the list of those projects there, 1 on co-processing by BCRC China, 1 on fluorescent tubes and compact fluorescent lamps by Chile, and inventorization awareness raising related to e-waste, and that would be in Liberia. So we're currently starting the development of the legal agreements associated with the implementation of those pilot projects. The group also, as mandated in the work program adopted by COP, they established a steering group. So this is really to standardize the way that the pilot projects are selected and to oversee their implementation. So that steering group has a regional balance and includes donors as well. They also discussed a structure and arrangements for pilot projects. So this is really formalizing some of the arrangements already in place, such as templates for pilot project proposals, a methodology for their implementation, oversight, evaluation, and reporting. So that's all to be standardized. This is something that the Secretariat has been working on the past few weeks after the meeting, and we'll be sharing with the expert working group shortly. So the idea is that this pilot structure may go to the open-ended working group in May for its consideration. And then, of course, it will be submitted to COP 13. So that's the main actions on pilot projects. Next, the draft practical manuals, which were mentioned in the COP decision. We did have comments from parties and others up until the deadline, and these were submitted to the meeting, the fourth meeting. And the members and observers worked very hard to try to integrate all of the comments received and where they couldn't integrate certain comments, they've made note of reasoning why that hasn't been done. So where the manuals are at this point is they will be with the expert working group really until the 1st of March for revision, and then they will be submitted to OEWG 10. So there will be an opportunity for parties to see those shortly. These manuals following OEWG 10 will be tested, and I'm going to come to that in a moment, and submitted to COP13 for its consideration and possible adoption. Next, something very closely aligned with the manuals are the development of these fact sheets on priority waste streams. You can see there the list of the priority waste streams, including e-waste, waste oils, for example. At the meeting, the group decided they developed already draft fact sheets on mercury and household waste. They decided, given the other processes, for example, what's happening in relation to the Minamata Convention and with respect to the partnership on household waste, that it would be prudent to halt the further development of those fact sheets until further outcomes were known from the other processes. But what the group did do for the remaining fact sheets, it revised those at the meeting on the basis of comments that had been received from parties and others. And again, these will be worked on by both the Secretariat and the group up until March, and then they'll be available for OEWG 10's consideration. And the idea is that these fact sheets will also be tested and then submitted to the COP following any necessary revision. Something that is another ongoing piece of work is this private sector incentive work. So, did I skip a slide? No, sorry, just a bit of confusion here. No, report on private sector incentives. So this is something that's been developed over the past couple of years, and it's looking at how do we encourage the private sector to implement ESM. This report was actually presented to COP12 as an information document and received positive response. What the group is doing now is further developing this report, and it's actually going to include an analysis of the benefits of ESM, so to make it quite a comprehensive piece of work. And then the next meeting of the expert working group will consider the next steps, whether adoption would be necessary, whether it could go to some sort of publication, but that's to be discussed at the next meeting. As mentioned, the Cartagena Declaration, specifically the roadmap therein, mandates the expert working group to develop this guidance on prevention and minimization. At the group, this was discussed quite extensively under the leadership of Professor Lee from BCRC China and Leila Devia from BCRC Argentina. And they will be leading a group to develop the outline for this guidance that well, they already have an outline actually, but they will be further refining that over the coming 2 months, and that will go to OEWG 10 once again for consideration, with the end point to be that the draft guidance would be available for COP13 in 2017. The expert working group, as mandated again by that work program that was adopted by COP12, looked at development of new manuals. 2 specific manuals were mentioned in the COP decision on extended producer responsibility and financing systems, and the expert working group has started working on outlines for both of those. The small groups are also working intercessionally on these particular manuals, with the idea that outlines will most likely be available for consideration at OEWG 10. Again, similarly, the manuals would then be submitted to COP13 for its consideration. So I mentioned before the idea that the draft practical manuals and fact sheets would be tested. This is something coming from the work program of the expert working group, whereby the COP recognised that these manuals have been developed, but saw the benefit of testing them in a country setting. So the group actually worked on a pilot project proposal at the fourth meeting that would really put a frame around this testing. Since that meeting, things have moved quite quickly. I'm pleased to say that we've received funding from the European Union to test the manuals and fact sheets in 4 regions over the next biennium. So that is something that the group will be looking at closely after OEWG 10. So that's after we have the input from parties and others at OEWG 10, any necessary revisions are made, and then there would be the testing would commence of those manuals and fact sheets. The idea is that the results of that testing, the feedback is of course factored in, and then that package goes to COP13 in 2017. So in addition to this work that I've already covered, the group also saw the need to retain consultants to assist with some of the other activities in its work program, one of which is development of an interactive internet portal. So this is really going to be a collection of things like ESM best practices and experiences, including those expert working group outputs already developed, which I've mentioned. So the pilot project outcome documents, there's been other reports on ESM, the ESM framework, for example, and that would all be brought together, but in quite an interactive manner, and that would be hosted on the BRS website. So the group has said we need a consultant to develop that portal. In addition, and this is linked really closely to the portal, is the development of an e-learning course. So this is really something that's interactive, step-by-step, that will be available online to help target audiences come up to speed with ESM requirements. Next, the work program also requested the group to develop a guide on self-assessment of national ESM capacity. So the group is going to retain a consultant to develop a questionnaire and a checklist that can move them closer towards development of that guide. Lastly, the work program also asked the group to identify existing programs and activities to promote the ESM toolkit. This is something that we will be doing in-house at the Secretariat, with the idea that at the 5th meeting, the group can consider training programs that could be used to help in disseminating the ESM toolkit, and also identify if new training programs are needed. So just quickly, some additional work streams include information gathering. There is a group that is working within the expert working group looking at, well, how could we use this webinar platform, for example, to do some training on ESM? What sort of materials could we develop that could really disseminate the tools that we've developed? Additionally, the expert working group is having an internal discussion about how to promote ESM in the informal sector, and this is something that they will continue discussing at their next meeting. And last, but certainly not least, is this inventory and categorization of ESM documents. Now, I've mentioned that this had been developed, a draft inventory that was taken to the 4th meeting of the expert working group. Now, in parallel, Canada has very kindly offered to finalize the inventory and categorization, and also to develop an analysis for submission to the OEWG. So the analysis would really highlight where the gaps and needs are. So that's a very welcome addition to this work, and we're working closely with Canada. I see Julie is is actually on this call, and that work will be available in the coming months. So just lastly, I'd like to touch on next steps for the group. Well, we're working intersessionally, and this work really the group has to develop all of its everything that is going to be sent to OEWG by early March. Then there will be the discussions at OEWG in May. Certainly at OEWG there will be the draft manuals, fact sheets, and certain other inputs or outputs that I've mentioned. They will be available at OEWG, including a report on what the group has been doing, because there is an awful lot of work that this group has been doing. The next step after OEWG is the 5th meeting, and that's going to be held in Bratislava, hosted by BCRC Slovakia in July, so soon after the OEWG. So at that stage, I will finish up. That is an awful lot of information, I know, very quickly delivered. So please, I'm more than happy to answer any questions. The co-chairs, Andreas and Alberto, may also wish to add something at some point, but for the time being, I'll hand back over to Dan, who will handle the question and answer session. Thank you.